All right, welcome back. Weekly text-based Tanya. And we are getting close to completing a long string of chapters that we started weeks, maybe months ago. We're getting close to the culmination of it where it's all going to pay off. It's going to click into place. It's all going to make sense after all this hard work. Okay. What chapter are we in the middle of? 24. Very good. We're in the middle of 24. And we've been speaking about something very interesting that, remember in chapter 23, we spoke about the nature of oneness with Hashem, that through learning Hashem's Torah and doing Hashem's mitzvahs, we become totally one with Hashem. We become absorbed and subsumed within that oneness in a seamless type of way. Yeah. Okay, that was 23. In 24, we spoke about something kind of scary and yucky and unpleasant, that if you do the opposite, then the opposite. When we break away from Hashem's will and we don't do what He wants us to do, or we expressly do, we do what He expressly told us not to do, then what happens? What is the effect? Is the separation. God forbid, we become separate from Hashem. And what he was saying last week is that actually when a human being of his own free will chooses to separate from Hashem, that's an even greater separation from Hashem than the default spiritual setting of the negative forces, negative spiritual energies, because they're programmed to do that. That's what they're supposed to do. But we're choosing to do it, and so it's much worse. It's much worse. Okay. Remember this? All sounds familiar? Okay. And we're going to continue. And I think we're going to finish chapter 24 today. And then next week, God willing, we'll do chapter 25. And then we'll really have completed a full thought. Basically, 18 through 25, as was said many times, is one full, complete thought. And then 26 is going to start a totally different subject. Completely new section of Tanya, basically. Okay, so we're up to the words in the text. Ve'im kain hachoyte va'over retzoni yisbarach. And if so, the sinner and the one who transgresses Hashem's will. Okay, ve'im kain hachoyte va'over retzoni yisbarach. If so, the one who sins and transgresses Hashem's will. What does ve'im kain, if so, mean? If so means it's a logical conclusion. Now, based on what we've been saying, we're going to now take us to the next step. Ve'im kain, so I'll read again. Ve'im kain, if so, if what we've said so far, and I'm not going to recap everything we said last week. I mean, I kind of just did very quickly, so I'm not going to recap more. Ve'im kain, if so, everything we said, based on everything we said last week in the first part of chapter 24, if so, hachoyte, one who sins, va'over retzoni yisbarach, and transgresses Hashem's will, meaning he says, I'm going to do what I want to do, not what Hashem told me He wants me to do. Afilu b'avera kala, even if it's a avera kala, that means a light sin. And why does he point this out? Remember, we've been saying, and I told you a disclaimer 100 times, do not generalize this into an overall attitude about Yiddishkeit, but for this method that we're learning right now, we have a very black and white attitude. There's no such thing as a big sin or a little sin. So even an aveda kala, with a kuf, not a kala like a bride, but kala, light. Even a light sin, a seemingly, what do you call a light sin? Oh, it's not biblical, it's only rabbinic, it's not such a big deal. It is a big deal because right now the way we are framing it is as a binary choice. There's either connection, and that connection is complete connection, or, God forbid, disconnection, and that disconnection is incomplete. If you pull the plug out of the wall socket, the lamp's it's a lamp. It's plugged into a lamp. I'm just making it up. There's not a real lamp. It's pretend. You want it to be something else? What?
It's good.
It's good? I mean, it could be a Cuisinart if you want, because it's just a mushel. If you pull the plug out of the wall, doesn't matter if it's an inch away from the socket or 10 feet away from the socket, or either way, the light's going to go out. So it doesn't matter. Disconnected is disconnected. So somebody who does a sin, even an Aveda Kala, even a relatively what we normally would call a light sin, B'shas Maisa, at that moment, and I stress again, B'shas Maisa, at that moment, okay? At that moment, Hu b'tachas arichuk mikdusho elyena, he is as far away from holiness as you could be. And what is holiness? Shehi Yechudei V'Achdus Yisbarach, Hashem's oneness. He is completely as far removed as Hashem from Hashem's oneness as could be. You're going to say, well, hold on a second. He could have done a far worse Aveda. That's not the way we're looking at it right now. The way we're looking at it is if the plug is pulled out of the wall by an inch or it's pulled out by 10 feet, either way, it's disconnected. And that's, you can't be more, there are no increments. Once you're disconnected, that's it. Now, again, remember I said b'shas ma'aseh, at that moment, because obviously there's linear time and there's something called tshuva, and you could plug the plug back in a second later. Okay, and we're going to deal with that because that good news could undercut the whole power of the method, because basically then you'll convince yourself, well, I'll deal with it later. I'll clean it up later. And that would undercut the whole power of the method, because the whole power of the method is to get ourselves to see this next moral choice as an all or nothing proposition where, God forbid, we stand to lose everything. So we'll deal with that. Okay. So at this moment, he is totally disconnected. Yoiser, and here's the chiddush. Yoiser mikol balei chaim etamei mishkatzim romasim mushboi misiter achad uklipas aveda zara. More disconnected than all of the impure, creepy, crawly things, and even more disconnected than the negative spiritual energies, which are the idolatrous entities of the spiritual realm. Because they're just doing their job. Whereas we are doing the opposite of our job. Now hold on a second. Someone's going to be smart. They're going to be smart and they're going to ask a question. The Alter Rebbe is dealing with a smart question now. He says, and this, that pikuach nefesh, that saving a life, pushes off, meaning grants momentary dispensation to violate all other sins. And even there is a concept of transgress so that you do not die, that you don't get killed. In other words, it makes it seem like there are gradations in sin. Because you're going to say, hold on a second. Torah itself categorizes some sins as sins that you should die rather than transgress, and others that you should not you don't have to die, but you should not die rather than transgress. So that sort of picks apart the whole method here. Because remember, without recapping everything we've been saying, we're trying to trigger the mechanism that gets triggered when a Jew is forced or faced with the threat of death if he does not renounce God, if he does not embrace idolatry. And we have this peculiar phenomenon through history of irreligious Jews. It's not peculiar if a religious Jew does this, but irreligious Jews who would rather die. Unfortunately, we have thousands, maybe millions of such cases in history where they'd rather die than be separate from a God. So we know that there is this mechanism, and I'm not going to go into recapping what the mechanism is. We described it at length in chapter 19, that prevents a Jew from becoming disconnected from Hashem. But that was only in real intense situations where the level of sin was, a big sin, but specifically it was idolatry. And now you're trying to take that same idea and apply it to Averis Kalois, little sins, like, I don't want to give you, I always hesitate, or more than hesitate, I generally refrain from giving examples of what light sins would be, because I always feel like I'm going to give people ideas. Like, oh, I didn't know that was a light one. Okay. Yeah, okay. It's like people here, you see sometimes people from Brooklyn, they park in Five Towns, they're like, how much are tickets here? Because in New York City, a ticket is like a serious thing. It's like a night out at a fancy restaurant. That's what a ticket is.
How much are they here?
How much? I don't want to know. Because my rationalization will kick in and be like, I'll feel like a gvir. I'll be like, I can park anywhere I want in Five Towns.
Probably not enough because everyone's people park.
Yeah, it's not like New York City tickets. What?
Double park, it's 150.
150 in Five Towns?
You're double park.
Double parked.
But if you're, here, and if you're...
Expired meter?
It's
35. I feel great. 35 for an expired meter.
That's if you pay it on time. If you wait too long,
All right, and then, okay. All right. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about different parking fines in different jurisdictions? What are we talking about? What are we talking? Better than witches. Oh, remember that last week, the witches? What if? But hold on a second. What if a witch doesn't pay the meter? Okay. What are we talking? We're talking about relative gradations in sin, right? So a person's going to say, hold on a second. Torah itself speaks about different categories, different levels. That's the whole idea of the, cardinal sins. Or I don't know where that term actually comes from. It's always the term, we use the term cardinal sins. Cardinal sin probably is Christological. Anyways, cardinal sins, as opposed to Blue Jay sins. Okay, we have some cardinals in our backyard, by the way. Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah. I'm from Illinois. The state bird of Illinois is?
Sounds like the cardinal.
The cardinal. Yes, correct. Very good. Yes. And of Missouri. They have the baseball team. State bird of New York? A pigeon. What? I think it's a pigeon. I think it's a pigeon eating a rat is the state bird of New York.
Google.
What? Okay. No offense to the New Yorkers. Okay. George Carlin said, New Jersey's called the Garden State. Yeah, garden if you're growing smokestacks.
Oh, my God. I'm a Jerseyite, not from
Oh, my goodness. Okay, George Carlin said it. No, I didn't say it. Okay.
You repeated it.
Well, I repeated it. B'Shem Oimrei to bring the geula. Okay. Okay. All right. George Carlin's best line, he says, think about how dumb the average person is. And half the people are dumber than him.
What'd you say the state bird of New York was?
A pigeon eating a dead rat.
According to Google, it's the eastern bluebird.
The eastern bluebird. That's much nicer. Yeah. Okay, eastern bluebird. If you're watching online, the eastern bluebird is the state bird of New York, the Empire State.
Right?
The Empire State. The state nickname is the Empire State. Okay. All right. Excelsior, right? Isn't that the state motto? Excelsior? You know what it means? Like striving, be excellent, be awesome. Yeah, I think Stan Lee adopted that as his slogan as well. I was yesterday, Tisha B'Av, I was in Forest Hills. I was at the Bukharian Shul at Beth Gavriel in, everyone knows where that is?
Yeah.
In Forest Hills. I parked on the Ramones Way. It was interesting. The street I parked on was called the Ramones Way because the Ramones are from Forest Hills. Yes. And then, well, I'm going to tell you, Stan Lee was from Forest Hills, and that's why Peter Parker's address is in Forest Hills. And the people who live at that address are actually called the Parkers.
Who's
And
Peter Parker?
we don't know. We're trying to get pictures of him. We don't know. Okay, listen. We don't know. Anyways, so actually we don't know who Spider-Man is. We know Peter Parker. I think he takes photographs for the Daily Bugle. Is that it right? Is that, or is that Superman, Daily Bugle? What? Oh, this isn't real?
No.
So anyway, Stan Lee, I'm telling you something interesting. Stan Lee, Oliver Shalom, he grew up in Forest Hills. So Peter Parker, who is canonically Jewish, by the way, lived in Forest Hills. And also, you should know, Stan Lee lived here in the Five Towns. Where did he live in the Five Towns?
I think in back Lawrence.
Back Lawrence? I think he lived in Woodsburg.
Maybe someplace in the back there.
Yeah, yeah. So let's Google that. Stan Lee lived in Five Towns. And anyways, he used to say Excelsior. Yeah. Okay. But listen,
I'm the only one whose Google works.
I'm going to retrace the steps here. We were talking about cardinal sins. And we were, remember the cardinal, the blue jay, and what's the state bird of Illinois, state bird of New York, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Excelsior, Eureka, that's California. Okay. Cardinal sins. We're saying, what's the deal with cardinal sins? Is that a real thing?
We're all wrong. He lived in Hewlett Harbor.
He lived in Hewlett Harbor. Stan Lee lived in Hewlett Harbor. Okay.
Excellent.
So, what's the deal with the idea of cardinal sins?
The word cardinal means very high.
Cardinal, yeah, right. So it makes it seem like Torah itself is agreeing to this idea, not agreeing to it, the Torah itself is coming up with this idea that there are gradations. There are gradations of sin. Some sins push off, or rather Pikuach Nefesh pushes them off, and some sins are not pushed off by Pikuach Nefesh, by a threat to life.
So Pirkei Avos says you can't go by that because you never
Well,
know
Pirkei Avos
what
doesn't
the
say you
fire
can't
of
go
a-
by it. Pirkei Avos says you don't know, and then Chassidus explains. Yeah, exactly. Okay, similar. Yes, very good. Okay, all right. So let's look at this, because the Alter Rebbe is answering a question that an educated person would have. All right, if you were really educated, you might ask this question on your own, but you didn't have a chance to ask this question on your own because we just. But I'm sure if we sat you down in a room by yourself for hours and said, come up with a smart question, one of you would have come up with this question on your own. But I didn't give you a chance to do it, so here it is. Okay. Here's the question. Aren't there gradations in sin? I mean, in Torah itself, it talks about cardinal sins. Okay. Hainu, so that is to say, you see where we're continuing. Hainu, Kepirish, Chazal, like our sages explain, Amra Torah said, Chalal, Olav, Shabbos, Achas, desecrate for this person one Shabbos, Kedei Sheyishma Shabbos Harbe, so that he should be able to keep many more Shabboses. There's a person who is in mortal danger on Shabbos, and saving him would require Chilul Shabbos, would require breaking Shabbos. Why are we allowed to break Shabbos? Because the rationale that Torah itself provides, it's not a mystery, Torah itself provides the rationale that if you desecrate Shabbos once to save this person, it will allow much more Shmiras Shabbos, the keeping of Shabbos, than the one little infraction right now. V'loi, and this is very important here, v'loi mishum kalus ha'avedis v'chumron, this has nothing to do with the relative low or high degree of importance or gravity of the sins. In other words, he's telling you something. Don't be smart and think to yourself, hold on a second, I just figured out that when it comes to, let's say, Aveda Zara, worshiping an idol, you have to die and not do it. When it comes to Shabbos, you have to violate Shabbos and not die. So I just figured out, logically, I'm doing a little bit of math here, back in the napkin math, I just figured out that there are gradations. He says, it's a different rationale. It has nothing, please do not try to deduce from this that there are levels and you figured out which are the more serious and which are the less serious infractions. That's not, that would not be correct. And he tells you, in this case, the rationale of why you are supposed to desecrate Shabbos to save a life, not because of the relative lower level gravity of Shabbos. It's because there's a simple rationale here that if indeed you care about Shabbos and you want more Shabbos to be kept, well, letting this person die on Shabbos is going to prevent them from keeping Shabbos for the rest of their life. So better save them now, and then a lot more Shabbos will be kept because of the moment of Shabbos desecration. Okay. And then he continues. This is a scholarly little section here. Teda, you should know. Teda means a proof. Teda means a proof. Sharei, Shabbos chamura ushkula kaved zara le'inyan shchitas mumer lo davar echad. You want to get really technical? Shabbos is considered to be tantamount to the entire Torah when it comes to the rules of who is a proper sheichet, a ritual slaughterer. Somebody who is a ritual slaughterer, do they have to be perfectly, completely, 100% religious? Ideally, obviously, yes. But halachically, if they're not, does their shchita, if they slaughtered animals, are those animals by default no longer kosher just because of who did the shchita? So we say, it depends. If the person who's the sheichet, let's say he keeps all mitzvahs except for one mitzvah, he doesn't care about shatnez, would that invalidate his shchita? We say, no, it wouldn't. What if he says, okay, well, there's another sheichet, and he keeps all the mitzvahs, just one mitzvah he doesn't keep Shabbos. We say, no. Shabbos is a deal breaker. Shabbos is what?
Does this apply also to a Baal Tefillah?
I don't know. I have no idea. This is hard enough for me to halt cup with. This is very technical, scholarly stuff here. Okay, just follow. The Alter Rebbe is doing remarkable scholarship right here. There's a prohibition, clear in halacha, that if a sheichet is not shomer Shabbos, even if that's the only thing, and when we say is a mumar lo davar echad, it doesn't mean that sometimes it's mechal Shabbos. It means he basically excused himself from that mitzvah. He said, I don't do that yet. That's not on my list, not on my menu. If he doesn't keep Shabbos, it could say it about another mitzvah, and obviously it's not good, and probably no one would hire him, but I'm saying, if it happened, if you discovered that there was such a sheichet, it doesn't invalidate his shchita per se, but if the guy doesn't keep Shabbos, that's it. Bam. So you look at that, from that perspective, it's clear that Shabbos is a very severe or very grave infraction, or the violation thereof. And he gives the source, but Yeredeya Siman Beis in Shulchan Aruch Yeredeya, chapter 2. But no, I can barely keep track of this. Like, you don't realize Tati is driving a 12-passenger van in the pouring rain right now, and the kids are asking, where is the orange juice drink box? And I'm saying, it's under the cooler, under your feet. And you say, I can't find it right now. And I'm saying, I'm going in the pouring rain. We'll get the juice boxes when we pull over at the next stop. Okay, so please, that's what's happening right now. This is not easy. This is not easy stuff. He's building a building right now. It's it's brilliant in its simplicity, but you have to follow each step. Okay. Mashein kain b'mumar legili aroyis. Shockingly, perhaps to some people, if the sheichet were a mumar l'davar echad, he was completely religious except for one area, and it was in the area of aroyis, of sexual immorality. I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying that it's not a big deal. I'm just saying technically on the books, you find out the sheichet doesn't keep Shabbos. Everything he shechts is absolutely not kosher. You don't even have to check into it. You find out the guy is immoral in his private life. You understand what I'm saying? Private life, okay? I said the word once. I don't want to say it again, but okay. Not that that's good, I'm just saying technically on the books, it doesn't automatically invalidate his shchita. That's what Shulchan Aruch says. Okay? Vafilu hachi, and nevertheless, watch this building, it's brilliant. And nevertheless, pikuach nefesh deicha Shabbos v'legil aroyis. Saving a life pushes off Shabbos, as we just mentioned, but not immorality of an intimate nature. Ella d'gzeres hakosov hu. Therefore, we have to conclude this is a gzeres hakosov. Gzeres hakosov means fiat, whim. That's just what Hashem decided. In other words, you want to crack the code of the logic here, and in order to start figuring out which Avedas are bigger Avedas, he says it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way because, watch what he says. There could be a sheikhet who doesn't keep Shabbos, and you can't eat his shchita. There could be a sheikhet who freely indulges in Gili Arayis. Not that it's good, again, but you can eat from his shchita. Okay, so that clearly indicates, or would seem to indicate, which is much more serious, Shabbos or Gili Arayis? Shabbos. But then you come in from another angle, hold on a second, but if there were a situation where it was, I will kill you if you don't transgress Shabbos, Shabbos gets pushed off. Or I'll kill you if you don't worship idols, idol worship does not get pushed off. So now what seems more serious? Idol worship. So what he says is you cannot construct a consistent, logical way of decoding a ranking here.
Isn't idol worship different than the first thing you're talking about? Idol worship is not the same as Gili Arayis.
We're saying
Idol worship is not the same as
No, but it's
Gili
one of the
Arayis.
3 sins that you're not supposed to transgress, that you give your life.
he's just pointing out that there's no consistency to it, because you would think that if a mumar ladavar echad, a sheikhet who doesn't keep one mitzvah, that Shabbos is a deal breaker and Gili Arayis is not a deal breaker. Shabbos is obviously the more serious one. Yeah, but then when you look at pikuach nefesh, yarig yavev v'la yarig, something that the person should transgress rather than die, then it's the opposite. He should be mechal Shabbos and not die, but he should not worship idols, and yes, allow himself to die. So the point is, we cannot figure out what the system is. He calls it gzeres hakosov. These things ultimately are just based on Hashem's infinite wisdom and divine logic that we cannot grasp. So the point is, again, this is the bottom line, and I've been saying it before, and I'll just keep saying it again. There are no gradations in sin. So disconnected is disconnected. There are no gradations in sin. Okay. Now, we said that disconnect happens at the moment of transgression. Right? B'shas Maisa was the wording. Remember? It was 20 minutes ago. You remember? 20 minutes ago? Okay. Continuing, after the brackets. Ela shela'acha Maisa echet. Now, it's true. After the deed is done, he finished the sin. Im hi me'aveda she'en bohen kodesh o misa b'dei shemayim. Again, certain gradations that seem to be in place when it comes to sin. If the sin is not one of those that incurs the penalty of kodesh, excision of the soul, or misa b'dei shemayim, death penalty by the hands of heaven. She'einav she'elakis mesa lagamri v'nichrosa meshorsha b'elakim chayim. Sins that do not cause the severance of the soul from its source. Rak shenivkam ktsas dveikusa v'chizosa b'shorsha b'chatzeh. Rather, it causes like a nick, like a little chip in the connection. So it doesn't sever the cord, but it puts a little cut or a little fray in the connection. Yeah. Ulefi erech v'chaluke bechinas hapagam benefesh uv'shosha be'elyenim kach heim chaluke bechinas hameduk v'oinish begehenem eba ilm hazeh. Proportionate or appropriate, commensurate to the nature of the damage done to the connection, that will determine the type or the intensity of the purification process, either in Gehenna, in purgatory, after one passes, or perhaps, which is much better to do it this way, to your advantage, that it should happen be'elam hazeh in this world. It's a much better exchange rate to have the purification happen while in this world than to do it in the next. At any rate, what he says is proportionate to the damage that one does through a particular sin. There are some sins that cause a complete severance, other sins that cause just damage to the connection. According to the level of damage will be the required purification, which will either take place as some type of enduring certain tribulations and pain in this world, which is the better way, or in the afterlife. Okay. Well, hold on. Let's. L'chol, it's still raining. Okay, I'll let you know when there's a rest stop. Okay. L'chol oven v'chet einish miyuchad. Each sin has a particular punishment. Why is the punishment particular? L'modek l'haver halichluch v'hapagam. The punishment is orchestrated or designed or engineered, probably the best word, particularly to purify and to remove the specific type of damage that the sin caused. Okay, so he's describing the fact that after the moment of disconnection, there are different levels of repair that will be required based on the levels of damage that were caused at the moment of the sin. And all of that is true, but don't allow that to confuse you about the fact that at the moment itself, disconnection is disconnection.
What other damage is there besides the disconnection?
What other damage is there aside from disconnection? So he described it. He said you don't cause a complete severance, but you weaken the connection. So he doesn't say it here, but like in Igeres HaTshuva, which is another section of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says, imagine a rope that was woven from 613 strands. And there are some sins which cut the whole rope, God forbid. There are other sins that just cut one strand. So even though it's one strand, it compromises the strength of the overall connection. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
Are we at a rest stop?
We're in 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 more words will be at a colon. V'chein b'chayavi misa v'kares ein pegmim kulam b'shava. He says, by the way, even in the category of sins that do incur misa or kares, God forbid, they are also not all identical. They cause different types or degrees of damage, and the repair required will be different, will vary in accordance with that. Okay, I'm at a little pause here. A little pause. This is not the hotel. This is just a rest stop. Everyone can just run in for 2 minutes. We're leaving in 2 minutes, okay? All right. Yes. Go ahead. You waited the longest.
Okay. So getting back to the shochet, when somebody becomes a shochet, is it like smicha that there's somebody overseeing it?
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
No, because if
Yeah, but
somebody
it's
is not Shomer Shabbos, shouldn't that have been flagged before they became a shochet?
Don't worry about it. It's not germane. It's not germane. Don't worry about it. No, I'm giving you permission not to be worried about it.
Okay.
I'm giving you permission. Don't get caught up on that. The only thing you have to know.
I'm just curious.
You're
Does
just
the
curious?
shochet get certified?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so-
Yes. Yes.
But he could
Okay.
not
Okay,
be
yes.
on his house.
I'm not understanding.
Okay, but that's.
Talk loud. Talk loud.
At least you know he was at one point.
The disconnection is complete, but after the sin, it's not. Like there's gradation. Like some sins weaken the connection more than others. I'm not understanding.
You're not understanding what?
You said it like at the beginning of this, in the moment of the sin.
In the moment of the sin is disconnect. So imagine the plug getting pulled out of the wall socket.
Right. But
Okay.
then
So cordis is that the cord got cut.
okay.
Well, obviously a cord getting cut is going to be a bigger issue to deal with than merely plugging a cord that got pulled out and just plugging it back in.
Right. So the Valentine is saying, at the moment that a person is sinning, you should imagine any sin could have that.
Any sin, it doesn't matter if somebody yanked the cord out of the wall or if they just bumped it with their foot. Disconnect is disconnect. Now, afterwards, when you need to reconnect it, there are going to be different levels. Like if it just bumped out and it's lying there, it's two inches away, boom, just plug it back in. Sometimes, though, no, the whole cord got cut, it got ripped. Okay, that's a bigger repair job. It's a much bigger repair job. But the point is that at the moment, it doesn't matter what caused the plug to come unplugged. Unplugged is unplugged. You don't get points. It's not like they say, well, because the plug is only 2 inches from the wall, we'll let the lamp shine a little bit, just weakly. No, it won't shine at all. Yeah.
I'm new here, so forgive the question.
Okay. And it could be something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't cover it, but
Okay.
would it be sweet to give us a framework and tell us how we should or should not view an Avera?
Correct. That's pretty good for someone who came here for the first time today. The purpose now is merely to give us a framework, that's your word, I like the word, how to view what an Aveda is. And I've said this to everyone else before you came here, like literally I think now 50 times, major disclaimer, in this particular context of these chapters, the framework we're using is a different framework than we normally use. In this particular context, we're taking a very intense all or nothing view. There are other views, and we'll speak about when those views are helpful. But right now, we're taking a very intense, and I always give the disclaimer because I don't want somebody to get freaked out by this and scared and discouraged, God forbid, and then it'll have the opposite effect. So everyone who came here signed a disclaimer before they entered the haunted house. Okay, that these are scary chapters. Scary, what I mean by scary is that it is very intense. The particular view of sin that we're describing now, yes, is a very intense framework of it's all or nothing. Yes, yes. And the reason why we're doing this, I'll even explain to you. I mean, I said it a little bit at the beginning, but if you haven't been here for weeks, it would have been hard to catch. He says that there's something inherent about the Jewish soul that will not allow itself to be disconnected from God when it's aware that that's what's happening. And that's why we have the historical phenomenon throughout history of irreligious Jews who died rather than renounce God. Because there's something built into the Jewish soul that will not allow us to be completely disconnected. However, when we go about our day-to-day lives, we rationalize all types of micro disconnections from Hashem, thinking that it's not a big deal. If we were to be able to reframe these rationalized sins and to see them as just as much of a disconnect as what we consider big sins, then our super Jew response would be triggered and we would suddenly have a much greater wherewithal to make the right choices. That's the framework.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
could you just add to that,
Yeah.
therefore, a Jew who's engrossed in Torah learning and doing mitzvahs is less likely to become unaware.
Okay, you're making a good point, which is separate from the technique that he's teaching right here. But you're saying that if a person is generally God conscious, meaning you're focused on the service of Hashem and you're focused on studying Hashem's Torah, that awareness will probably cause you to be more Aware, yeah, and therefore more careful not to allow any type of disconnect. Yeah, that's true. I'm not going to say it's not true. It is true.
A Jew that's further away doesn't have that.
Right. Yes, that's true. But that's not the technique that he's describing right now. So I just want to make sure. What you're saying is a true statement, but separate from this technique.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? We're pulling away in 30 seconds. Okay?
Go.
Let's get to the hotel.
I'm 100% positive the second that I start, just like you pull away and then, I have to go to the bathroom. Exactly. I'm going to start reading and someone's like, wait, hold on a second. What was the state bird of New York? Okay, we're ready to go? Because I think we can finish chapter 24 right now.
Eastern bluebird?
Okay. Eastern bluebird? Okay, good. If you learned only that, okay, then it was worth it. It was worth. Okay. All right. So let's continue. V'chein b'chayavi misa v'kares. Now I said that, that was the last thing I said. Okay. Right after the two dots. Harigam nafshei hachayunas habahamas hamelubeshes b'gufa v'chein gufei. So after the sin, so then his enlivening soul, his animal soul, the energy that keeps his body alive, and also his body itself, they go up, not physically, it's not like going up like an elevator, but they spiritually ascend from having been bound to these negative energies, but now they're released from it because he stopped sinning. And they go up and attach themselves to the holiness of his godly soul, which is inside of the animal soul, which is inside of the body. Hamamino b'Hashem echad, which believes, the godly soul believes in the oneness of God. So he's describing the mechanics of what happens at the moment of the sin. The body and the animal soul who are choosing the sin become attached to klipa and sitra achra, negativity, and disconnected from Hashem. At the end of it, however, the animal soul and body are then they're released from that hold, from the negativity, reattach themselves to the holiness of the godly soul, which believes in God. In fact, even at the moment of the sin, the godly soul was loyal and true to Hashem. That's an expression from the Megillah, talking about Esther. The godly soul was in a state of exile. It was a captive. It was a hostage to the animal soul. The animal soul was causing the body to sin, and it was plunging the godly soul into the depths, into the pit, or actually probably plunging the whole package, the body and itself, the animal soul, and the godly soul, which is trapped within the animal soul, into the depths of spiritual depravity. In fact, as we said earlier, even lower than the spiritual station of the negative energy itself. Because the negative energy is only doing what it was programmed to do. When we do it, God forbid, we've chosen to do it, it's a much greater violation and abrogation. Okay, so he's describing what happens at the time of the sin. There's this disconnect. The animal soul, which is the ego, the self-preservation instinct, which has rationalized, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, even if Hashem says it's wrong. It does what it does. It causes the body to do the sin. Then the body and the animal soul, as well as the poor little godly soul, which is a hostage, get disconnected. Although the godly soul remains loyal. It's very sad. She's like being schlepped along because she knows it's wrong. She's never fooled. Godly soul is never fooled. She remains loyal to Hashem, even though she's trapped in the animal soul, which is trapped in the body, so she has to go along for the sin, which she hates. It's the most violating thing because she knows how wrong it is. Once it's over, then the animal soul and the body can detach from the negativity and go back up and reconnect themselves with the holiness of the godly soul. Ve'ein lecha golus gadol mizeh. There's no greater golus, there's no greater exile than this condition, the condition of the poor little godly soul, which is trapped in a body. Me'igra rama chulu, from a high roof, and he doesn't finish the statement, but this is a very, very well-known expression from our sages. Actually, the original context is talking about an animal falling off a roof into a pit, but that's not how we use it at all. In Chassidus and Kabbalah, Me'igra Rama, from a high roof, means from the heights of heaven, where the soul started off before its embodiment. La Beda Mikta, into a deep pit, means embodiment, the physical experience of being in a physical body. So the soul comes from this highest level of the heavens, and it's plunged down deep into this pit called physical embodiment, and it's a hostage there. And it's a terrible violation of the godly soul when it is schlepped along for these acts of rebellion against Hashem. Ukameshin is bar la'el, the shadish hamakin nefashis kol beis Yisrael, hu mechach mi'elav, hu yisbarach v'chochmasi yachad v'chulu. As we explained above, who's going to impress me to tell me what it means we explained above? We explained above, meaning pick 1 through 23 will be the answer, because this is 24. As we explained above, meaning one of the previous 23 chapters, that the source of the godly soul is the level called chochmei elah, supernal wisdom, and Hashem and his wisdom are one, meaning to say the source of the godly soul is really one with God himself. That is where the godly soul is coming from, and then we hear where it goes to and the situation that it's trapped in during embodiment. What does it mean, as we explained above, that the godly soul is from chochmei elah and it's one with God? Hashem and his wisdom are one. Where is that from? Which chapter? Nobody wants to guess? No one wants to risk it?
Before 18.
What? Before 18, yeah.
Chapter 10.
Even earlier?
7.
Even earlier?
1.
3.
2. Who said 2? Do you say 2 just randomly? It was a guess? Okay. Okay, fine. All right. You won the prize. It was 2. Yeah, it is 2. Yeah. Okay. Yes, it's 2. Okay. V'hu kamashal. This is really sad. Okay. V'hu kamashal. What happens to this pure little godly soul, which essentially is a representation of Hashem himself? What happens when the godly soul is plunged into a body and then that body is directed by the animal soul to do an act of rebellion against God, which we call a sin? This is metaphorically, ha'oiches bereisha shel melech, someone grabs the head of the king. Put the king in a headlock, which is disrespectful enough. Meridai lamata, and you pull his head down. V'taimin panav b'seich beis hakisei malitzaya, and you push his face into a toilet that is full of excrement. Yeah, I'm just translating. This is what he says here. She'ein lecha elbein gadol mizeh. There's no greater degradation than that. There's no greater degradation. You take a king, you put him in a headlock, you wrestle him to the ground, and stick his face in an unflushed toilet. There's no greater disgrace. Afilu eisa kain lefisha, even if you do it for a moment. Even if you say, well, I didn't hold him there all night. I just dipped his face in the toilet for a second. Doesn't matter how long it endured for, there is no greater disgrace. So this is what he says. When the pure, pristine, beautiful, innocent, godly soul is schlepped along for the ride because it's embodied, it's enveloped within the animal soul, which is in turn enveloped within the body. And now the animal soul, because of its ego, rationalizes doing whatever it feels like doing, even if it's an Avera. And now the body goes along and does it, and the animal soul is in control at that moment. The pure little godly soul is getting pulled along. She's a hostage. What's happening really is the animal soul is like grabbing the godly soul. And the godly soul here represents the king because she's not just the princess. She's the princess. She represents the king. The godly soul is sometimes called the princess, but she represents the king. What does it mean the soul is godliness? It is a soul. It's not God, but it represents God. So it's like the king himself getting wrestled to the ground and he gets his face plunged in the toilet. And even if it's momentarily, there's no greater disgrace. As is known, that the negative forces are called vomit and excrement. And why? Just to be gross? Why are the negative forces called ki tzaya? Why are they called vomit and excrement? Just to make you not like them? I would argue actually the opposite. That not that klipa is gross because it's compared to vomit and excrement, but that vomit and excrement is gross because it is a physical manifestation of klipa. Kedusha, holiness, is life. Life is only the life of all life, is Hashem. Kedusha is life. The opposite, anything that does not surrender itself, like we learned in chapter 6, to Hashem, doesn't have life. It can siphon off a little bit of hijacked vitality, like a little Frankenstein's monster, so that it can have enough to move around and do its stuff. And that's really basically what the klippa is like. It gets this little amount of energy just so it can go around and cause the damage that it's supposed to cause, which is part of Hashem's plan. But it is not life, and it has no life of its own. Ki tzoya, excrement and vomit. As long as we're going to talk about these things, we might as well explain the purpose of the metaphor. Are talking about, the point, but it could have used other metaphors. You're talking about what the body is expelling that is not nourishing. The point is that there's nutrition, there's nourishing, there's substance that has value, and then there's the garbage that you get rid of. It's garbage. You get rid of it. Klippa has no vitality. It's garbage. In fact, that's why ultimately when the world is perfected, after Mashiach comes, it'll just fall away. Because it doesn't really have any identity of its own. It's devoid of energy. It's the absence of life and energy. So what he says is, if you think about it, at the moment when you force your godly soul to come along for this act of rebellion against God, you know what I always think of, by the way, when I think about, remember the Symbionese Liberation Army? Mm-hmm. You remember that? Patty Hearst. That's right. And she was the daughter, granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst? Daughter? William Randolph Hearst. He was the real guy that Citizen Kane was based on, right? He owned a bunch of newspapers, and Shangri-La, the thing in California, the fancy mansion, right? That's the guy? Okay. So she was like this socialite, and they kidnapped her, and they brainwashed her, and they turned her into a bank robber. Right? That was the whole thing? Yeah. And then the whole question was she really responsible because she had Stockholm Syndrome? She was in jail. And she went to jail, right. So I always imagine, I don't know if this is just my metaphor, I don't know, whatever. The poor little godly soul, she's this princess. She has her father's the king. And then these bad guys, they kidnap her and they're like, you're going to work for us and you're going to rob banks for us. That's how I imagine it. So, if it helps you, it helps you. Right. Well, it's a good metaphor? Okay. So at any rate, the point is, when the sin occurs, the godly soul is being hijacked. It's being forced to come along. That's a degradation of the king, because the godly soul represents the king. It represents God, who's being now forced to have this. You're putting his face in the filth, okay? And even if it happens for a moment, there's no greater degradation. So here's the point, in context of what we're talking about. Please understand that it doesn't matter if you think this is a big sin, it's a little sin, one of the cardinal sins, a sin that you're allowed to violate in order to save a life, a sin you're not allowed to violate to save a life, a sin that a sheichet could do and a shechita still kosher. Forget about it. Stop it. There's only one question here. Does Hashem want this, or Hashem tell you he doesn't want this? If it's something Hashem says he doesn't want, then it doesn't matter the level. There are no levels. It's a disconnection, and it's a degradation of the king himself, even if it happens for a second. Yes, I know afterwards you could repair it. It doesn't change the fact that at that moment, the separation is total and abject. Okay, so we'll continue next week with chapter 25.
Oh, we're at the hotel?
Yeah.
Is this the same